Hi, guys. I just wanted to go through some images of Europe, mostly Europe, at the time that Kafka was alive. I know that you didn't like my existentialism keynote, so I will try to go fairly quickly, but I wanted to give you some context as to why Kafka would write such a depressing novella, right? Such a depressing story, and most of his stories are. I think that you could argue that it has a happy ending for the sister and the mom and the dad, but certainly it doesn't have a happy ending for Gregor, and it doesn't have a very positive tone overall. So these three pictures are of Prague in during the time that Kafka would have been alive. So this is like late 1800s, early 1900s. I think Kafka was born in 1880 and died in 1920, I think. So yeah, I mean, there were nice parts of Prague. Obviously, there was plenty of rich people, and but there wasn't really a middle class at this time. You either had a lot of money or you lived in the way that we're looking right now. Also, this was a time, of the Industrial Revolution, and these are not pictures from Prague because I couldn't find any, but these are just European Industrial Revolution images, and I'm sure that Prague would have had some similar to this. And you're probably looking at it and you're thinking, oh, that looks like Northwest Indiana. That looks like Gary or East Chicago or Whiting or Hammond. And I mean, you're right, in a sense, it does. But I, as bad as our pollution is, and it is bad. It's not like this. I mean, this is just absolutely unfettered, unregulated pollution going into the air. So Kafka would have been around that all the time. I mean, you can see how that would affect somebody's psyche, right? Like this would be pretty depressing to look at all the time. Also, during this time, child labor laws did not exist. So the picture on the left is actually young teenagers, maybe not even teenagers, 10, 11, 12 years old, who have all been maimed in industry, in factories. Notice that the boy in the front, he is not kneeling down. He does not have any legs. And you can see all of the amputees in the back of them. So children were used very often to go in. You probably have learned this in history, but they were used very often to go inside machines and fix them because they were small. And so they could fit in the machines. But then oftentimes, once they fixed the machine and it started to work again, they would lose a body part, in the gears and the grinding and all of that. On the right, you don't see any amputees or any children that are maimed, but they're obviously very, very young. I mean, we're talking about middle school aged kids, and just look at how filthy they are. They've been working all day long, and while obviously we don't see any external scars, imagine what this is doing to their lungs, and imagine what it's doing to just, I don't know, even their like hearts. And I don't really mean that physically. I guess I mean that emotionally. Next, I want to show you a couple pictures of World War One. I think that I've mentioned before that I have a degree in European history. I don't know if I've ever told you that my focus was World War One, and it's not something that I think we learn a lot about in high school. We tend to learn a lot more about World War Two, and I think World War Two is an easier war to learn about because there were clearly good guys and bad guys in World War Two, and World War One, kind of everybody's just sort of bad. I'm not sure there are any good guys in World War One, but World War One is what we consider to be a transitional war, where, and this happens throughout history, every maybe 100 years or so, you have technology outpace like strategy. And so what happens is you go to war and you employ the same strategies that you've always employed, but now there's technology that can destroy that old strategy. The technology that did that in World War One was the machine gun. So prior to World War One, you had repeating rifles that could shoot one bullet at a time, and you would cock it and you would shoot the next bullet, and you would cock it and you would shoot the next bullet, right? And so they would run out of the trenches, the soldiers would, and plenty of them would get killed, but they would get killed one at a time. And then in World War One, they employed the exact same strategy, except now they had machine guns. And so they would roll out of the trenches and they would get mowed down. You have battles like at the Battle of Verdun where 50,000 people died in one single day. That is 5 times the population of Lowell in one single day because they just rolled out of the trenches and they just got mowed down. Also, I wanted to show you just how filthy the trenches were. You probably know this as well since we're currently in a pandemic, but a big reason for the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic was World War I and the people living in filth. And of course, there's rats and everything else in these trenches. This is just another shot of the trenches. These things went for miles. I mean, they had a trench in France, maybe southern Germany. It was either not southern, but like southwestern Germany or northeastern France. I'm not sure which one, but it literally ran the entire length of the country, which I would imagine would be 200, 300, 400 miles of trenches. If you saw the movie, I think it was called 1914 or 1917. It just came out a couple years ago by Sam Mendes. It's about World War I. You see the opening shot where this guy is walking through yards and yards and yards and yards of trenches. But again, these people lived, the soldiers lived in the trenches. So just look at how filthy that is. Now, Kafka was not in World War I. So, but he was, in the military and he did experience things like this. And then one more picture of World War I. Mustard gas was used. That was not outlawed yet. It's an international crime to use mustard gas in war. What mustard gas did was, if it got on your skin, it would basically boil your skin. It didn't kill you, or at least it didn't usually kill you, but it would just deform you. What you're looking at here are people who got mustard gas in their eyes, and they all went blind as a result. Just a horrific war. And then the last slide, this is a comparison of what Europe looked like in 1914 on the left to what Europe looks like now in 2020. So, the one on the left is, Kafka's Europe, right? And so I told you that he was a German Jew living in Prague, which is now part of, the capital of the Czech Republic. But at the time, it would have been a city in Austria-Hungary. So the magenta and Prague was kind of like where that piece of Austria-Hungary goes into the German Empire. That's sort of where Prague is. You can see Prague. It's almost in the middle of the picture on the right. Because the Czech Republic, exists as its own country now. But I guess what I wanted to just say about this is that I think it's hard for us to understand how horrible it was for these empires to envelop so many different ethnicities. Austria-Hungary was an empire where you had like 100 different major ethnic groups being ruled under one. Well, by this time, Austria and Hungary, 2 ethnic groups. And so, like, if you were Czech and you spoke Czech, you went to school and you learned German and you learned Hungarian. Those were the official languages. And, there were Russians that lived in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Obviously, you can see on the right, there were Yugoslavs, there were Serbs, there were, all kinds of different people. And they were all made to conform to Austria-Hungary. And I know that's hard for us to understand and hard for us to see why that would be so bad. But think about it this way. We live in a country where half the people in this country think it's terrible. when you get a recording and it says press 1 for English and 2 for Spanish. And some people are like, you don't want to speak English, go back to your own country, right? Meanwhile, this is their country, but whatever. That's beside the point. I guess what I'm saying is maybe that puts it into some context for you. I mean, we don't even like people to speak another language. And here was an empire forcing millions of people to give up their religion, their language, their cultural identity, and everything like that. So hopefully this keynote is quick enough and gives you an overview of really how bad things were in Europe during Kafka's time. And when you're surrounded by that, it doesn't make you happy, and it leads you to write stories like The Metamorphosis. One last side note, if you've made it this far, I believe that understanding World War I is the key to understanding Europe today. So when you go to college, if you're ever, I don't know, I know that some of you hate history, but history is very different in college than it is in high school. If you're ever given the opportunity to take a class in World War I, or maybe not World War I, but like late 19th, early 20th century European history, it really can inform you on the ways in which the world works today. Okay, thanks guys.